And before we get going, here's a word about our sponsors. SDHQ Motorsport is a powerhouse 30,000 square foot facility with 45 family members reporting for duty. This single owner, single location business is based out of Gilbert, Arizona. It can handle anything from a hot rod, daily driver, pre-runner, race vehicle, half-track or Kugelwagen, or just about any other project you need help with. Their skilled staff with hundreds of years of combined experience eats, sleeps, and breathes performance. So go check them out at sdhqmotorsports.com or check them out on Insta at sdhqmotorsports. Well, hello and welcome along to another We Happy For You 506 podcast, The Nearly Men, with me, my beautiful co-host Doug Allen, Matt Mabe, and our special guest who I will introduce in a second. How are you doing, Dougie?
I'm very well, thank you, Matt. How are you? It's an epic moustache you're growing there.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. I had a beard. I can never. I'm liking it. I'm liking it. Okay, so I hope this podcast is going to go well. And I need to preface it by saying what has happened this afternoon. I know we've done podcasts where I've shot off before because my son has eaten a mushroom or whatever it is that has happened. This wasn't mad. I have what can only be described as a food coma going on. I have my friend is married to this lady who is a throwback to the 1950s domestic goddess, and I'm terribly jealous. And she cooks these incredible meals. And she invited me around for Sunday lunch, which ended up being at 5 o'clock in the evening. And I starved myself. As you know, I'm a greedy little critter, and I eat all the time. I didn't eat my night sandwich last night, and I starved myself all day. And I've just been there, and I've just finished up, and I've literally got a gut on me like I don't know what now, and I'm pretty stoned. So I also don't drink. I'm stoned on food, man. Honestly, there's so much rich food. I don't drink caffeine, and I've got a monster on the go because honestly, literally, I was spaced out 10 minutes ago.
Well, I can't see. I think this is going to go exceptionally well. I think,
It's gonna be
Matthew.
brilliant, man. I don't see
Yeah,
how it can go badly at all. I'm slurring
I
my
don't
words.
see that either. Yeah.
We should introduce our guest, and then I'm going to re-tinker things a little bit from what I had because I didn't realize Maddie Mabe was here, so I want to make the most out of Maddie Mabe as well. Hey Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you too. Hopefully, well, we're going to meet each other in a couple of weeks' time, aren't we? We're in DC together.
Quite a mix of Band of Brothers meets Masters of the Air here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, yeah. I know Sawyer Spielberg's going to be there. You know, he's just kind of needy. He's always texting me. You know, Spielberg's. what can I tell you? Please keep being my friend. So we've got a guest here tonight. We've got Christopher Lakewood. How you doing, Christopher?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thank you. Yeah.
Great. So I was going to talk quite a bit about your dialect coaching, only because that's my absolute nerdy hobby.
Well, I'm currently drinking from, this is very nerdy, but this is an IPA mug.
Yeah.
Actually, this is even more nerdy. This is a coaster which the mug is resting on, which is the vowel space. So
wow.
no, you're in good company. I'm a massive speech nerd. Yeah.
Dude, where do I get that from? Because I want that.
Well, this you can get from online. This I made myself at a pottery painting thing with my wife. She made a sheep, I think, and I sat and did this. And it's supposed to be quite sort of, relaxing pottery painting. But I found it so stressful getting all the symbols right. And I'm not, not the neatest person, but I'm quite pleased with the result.
That is another level of nerdiness. Making your own coaster for was it vowel pronunciation or something?
Yeah, exactly. So it's
Wow.
it's a if you're interested, it's a square that represents the vowel space. So it's talking about where the body of your tongue is in your mouth when you make different vowel qualities.
Oh, Chris, but you might be my favorite guest of all time. Dude, we're getting well back into this, and Doug is going to hang himself. But let's get into the Masters of the Air stuff first, and we'll talk about Colonel Thomas Jeffrey. Shall we get Maddie Mabe on and talk about Colonel Thomas Jeffrey and what he did to tighten the ship and make it a far better outfit? Can we talk a bit about that, Matt?
Sure. So it's interesting. Jeffrey came into the group at an interesting time because you remember the series itself really focused on the Black Week type time period with Chief Harding, who himself was a great commander. But Jeffrey came in during kind of that rebuilding era, and he was, as you might have seen in the Bloody Hundred documentary, he was the right man for the job. He was with the 390th Bomb Group before that, had a solid track record. Was one of these guys that was recruited by Curtis LeMay to come in and not necessarily clean up things because it was a solid organization, but just tighten things up, help with formation flying, which would help hopefully reduce some of the losses. And the guys really respected Tom Jeffrey, who was a phenomenal leader. And when you see these photos of him, he looks like he's 40 some years old, but he is, practically as young as most of the guys that are there at the time. But just a well-respected guy who really left a mark on the group. He was there from May of 44 until February of 45. So just a solid figure who offered some consistency and stability within the group and is, still well-respected today.
Where did he come from?
So he was one of these guys that was cut out for being in the military. He went to VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, and had joined the Army Air Forces before the war, kind of like Egan and Clevin and some of these guys. And like I said, before the 100th, he was with the 390th Bomb Group and flew a number of missions there. So he was he was very acclimated to what was in store for him when he reached the 100th.
Mm. How much did you know about this, Christopher, beforehand? And have you linked up with Matt Mabe before?
Yeah, we chatted together briefly on Instagram. Yeah, hey Matt.
Yes.
And I'm glad you're here to talk that through because I would have done a much more garbled, inaccurate version of that. But yeah, I mean, the 100th Bomb Group website was so useful in terms of the research, and he pops up in quite a few of the books. He's in Crosby's book quite a lot. And there's, of course, that incredible interview with him, which is featured quite heavily in the documentary. So I felt like I was quite lucky in some ways in that there was so much stuff of him out there. But yeah, really, really inspiring guy. And some of the things that I thought were quite interesting were that he seemed, especially the kind of script version of him, seems like this very sort of formal guy that's about kind of rules, and he's coming in and he's sort of trying to make the formations a little bit tighter and things. But there's also this side to him which is quite sort of playful. He introduces himself as Colonel Jeff, which I think actually that bit was cut. But and I read that he used to entertain the men on the guitar and stuff. So I loved that kind of contradiction, that kind of formality and the sort of playfulness.
Right. Yeah, because it's one of the major things about leading a squadron like that is you actually can't get too close to the men. So it's a fine line that he's walking.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
But he had those twin qualities, did he, Matt? Was he someone that was very sort of personable and close to his men as well? It's so difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, he was. And it's as you said, it's a really fine line. You don't want to get too close to the men, but he did know a lot of these guys personally, and they really respected him as well. And I think it's pretty neat. He was he was career military after that, but really had a close link to the 100th. So he came to reunions over the years. I mean, he was the guy like playing harmonica, giving a toast, like just your guy's guy. Everybody loved Tom Jeffrey, and it was pretty moving. He wasn't health-wise, he wasn't able to attend the reunion in 2007, which would have been his last reunion, but he sent a message that he wrote. And I mean, you could have heard a pin drop. You had 60 veterans there who were still listening for what their CO had to say. And, that was kind of his last chance to, say hi to his guys. But just, I can't say enough nice things about him, but just really well respected and just a great guy. Everybody liked him.
Fantastic. How'd you come about landing a role, Christopher?
Just auditioned for it, and then it was obviously during the pandemic when we were doing it all, so it was all online. And I remember for the recall, we were doing a sort of Zoom recall, so it wasn't a tape; it was a sort of live but remote thing. And I remember the internet froze. So I was doing some scenes with Olivia Grant, who's one of the casting directors for it, and the screen just froze. So I kind of thought,
Did it freeze on an ugly moment?
Yeah.
I can't really remember. I don't think she was doing anything particularly strange with her face. But I thought, oh well, they're sort of recording this and sending this off, so I'll just sort of press on. So I remember thinking afterwards, yeah, I don't know if that was the best. It was quite a tricky sort of environment to do a good job in, but yeah.
How old were you, and how old was he? Because Matt Mabe said that he looks middle-aged. You know what I mean?
I don't know if he looks that. I feel like in the pictures, I wonder if his moustache, if that was a sort of tact, because I felt like he looked quite young. I think he was 27 when he became the CEO of the 100th Bomb Group. I was 29 or 30, I think, when I filmed it. And yeah, I've
Currently looking at you, I'd put you at about 19.
Was a kind of. Sorry, what was that?
You look about 19.
Yeah. No, I've got quite a young face.
But then again, the whole cast looked very young. They were very young, weren't they?
Yeah. I felt like the moustache. I'm obviously guessing and put my own stuff on it, and maybe it's partly because I'm terrible at growing facial hair. So I'm very impressed with with what you've got going on. But I felt like maybe that was a way of making him feel older, because it's quite strange, isn't it, being the kind of leader amongst people where you're kind of the same sort of age. I can imagine.
I think that's quite common in World War II, just throughout necessity. I think both in the land, the sea, and the air. I think a lot of the commanders COs ended up being the same age as their enlisted men. And I think the moustache thing, it was just quite a trend.
Yeah.
Back then, wasn't it? And especially with air guys. I know that the British, the RAF, their moustaches were very popular there, weren't they? I think it's very similar to what it is now. I don't think it's any different. I think it is just a kind of a fashion thing.
Yeah.
Matthew is displaying epically right now. So you've taken it down to the chin, I see. You've gone
it down to the chin, yeah.
You've gone the full thing.
Yeah.
And how was your accent on it? I'm imagining it was absolutely perfect then. Was it difficult to get the accent, Christopher?
Well, I was hoping, because there's that incredible video of him, I was hoping that I could do some idiolect work, an individual dialect, so matching his specific, accent and voice quality. The director preferred that I did more of a kind of period general American accent, because I think pretty much all of the other commanders that we see are all from the South as well. And I think they thought, let's make a sort of, creative license here so that we don't have lots of people with same price and time and things like that. So we have a bit of... Also, I wonder if the thinking was, this is somebody who's supposed to represent a kind of sense of formality. And so that more kind of general American sound kind of works with that.
More authority. It's just as a sort of creative license in an effort to create authority, but putting more.
Yeah, maybe.
Voice. And
Where was he from?
Interesting.
Where was he? Where was he from, indeed?
He's from Virginia, I think. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, he spent most of his life in Virginia. And I agree. Actually, even though you said they generalized it, when I watched it, I was like, wow, I could picture that sounding like Tom Jeffrey. When you watch the post-war video, he still speaks in a very,
well, what I did, which was maybe a little bit naughty, was I did the accent that they wanted, but I took some of the prosodic patterns that I'd heard, some of his kind of musicality that he had this kind of quality like this, where he would kind of punch particular words. And then there's something called vocal tract posture in accent work, which is essentially how your mouth feels. So every language and accent has a kind of set of tendencies for the muscles in the vocal tract. That's everything from the nose to the larynx. And so different accents, we have tendencies of kind of what we do with our muscles. So, for example, if you think of a stereotypical French speaker, you might imagine somebody that is kind of slightly rounding their lips and kind of, there's these muscles called the buccinator muscles in our cheeks that we're sort of holding on to a little bit. So what I did, which was maybe a little bit naughty, but kind of felt like it was me tipping my cap to what I'd experienced of his voice, was I sort of found some of the prosodic patterns and some of the kind of postural tendencies. So I noticed he kind of didn't really, he didn't have very much lip mobility, upper lip mobility. It was kind of sort of pulling his lip down, and the buccinator muscles were slightly engaged. And so that gave me this kind of particular kind of quality, which maybe isn't quite right for the period general American accent, but felt sort of felt sort of like meeting halfway towards the voice that I'd heard.
That is incredibly. That's really in depth.
Yeah, I mean, it's just because I'm a dialect coach as well, so it's just how
I appreciate that.
I love it, and I love that idiolect stuff. I find it fascinating, not just the accent, but the kind of the particular voice and syncrasies of a particular speaker. I love that stuff.
Had you spent a long time formulating, like finding his actual accent from watching his piece on the documentary, and was it like on the first day of filming? Did the director say, or did you?
No, it was a little while before.
Okay.
So there are a couple of dialect coaches that were working on it, and they were sort of listening to everybody. And I had a meeting with them, which was really fun. They're a much more experienced dialect coach than I am, but I really enjoyed just having a nerdy chat with them. And they said, basically the director wants to do this. This kind of, I suppose you could think of it as a kind of more upper class general American accent. So and it was a little while before. If it was on the day, I would have found that a little bit more stressful, I think.
Right. So 2 things, Christopher. One, I'm finding this very arousing. This is really, I just absolutely love this chat. It's fantastic. And 2, for that little bit that you did the Virginian accent, is freaking spot on, and I can tell you that because basically I grew up in Virginia.
Oh, really? Oh, I wish I did. I would have listened to it and done a bit more work before.
No. I mean, Matty Mabe lives. You live in Vienna, don't you, Matty? And so he and I are sort of basically neighbours, and that you still get old timers that sound exactly like that. It's still just that specific clipped way of talking. It's a very specific Virginian accent, and it's absolutely dead on. It's very impressive.
I think that that description of it being clipped is exactly my experience listening to it. So many things I want to dive into now. Do we get into the accent? What for people listening, because they will be interested by this, what is the difference between a modern day American accent, a contemporary American accent, a general that you might have actors do on TV, because a lot of them lose their accents to have this sort of general TV accent, and the 1940s accent. And if you want to talk about it as well, what changed and why? So maybe first of all we could talk about general American accent. I always put bunny rabbit ears around that because it's sort of a made up accent. It's not the accent of a specific area. It's I think linguists talk of it as an accent which doesn't have salient regional features, regional or cultural features of other accents. In terms of the time period thing, I think that the period general American accent feels a little bit more like a mid-Atlantic accent. There's some kind of Britishisms within it, I think. So if you think of that kind of sort of old school Hollywood accent that actors were taught in drama schools, this is the accent that you should have as an actor if you want to work, was the sort of, what voice teachers would be saying at the time. You'd get that kind of, Audrey Hepburn, Cary Grant sort of thing, which is, kind of a mid-Atlantic accent. And I think the sort of period general American accent has some similarity with that. So things like, I say this now, and I don't think anybody was really doing this, but one of the features might be what's happening with t in between vowels. So rather than something like butter, we might get butter. But I don't think that's a particular element that people were doing, but that's something that you hear in those mid-Atlantic accents.
So this interests me. So when we think about the 1940s funny years, general American accent, was it actually much more regional? Because people were mostly agrarian, were at farms and all sorts around the place, especially the guys that went over and fought. Are we just influenced by sort of Hollywood dialect coaching as what we think as the general American?
That's a really, because in terms of the really recordings, you probably don't have as much access. I mean, I think that's a really good point because, we're gonna, what gives us our accent is how we learn whatever language we're learning, whatever sort of accent of English, what we're around, and then also what we aspire to be as well. And in a modern context, we've got access to recordings from all over the world. We might digest a lot of American TV, for example. So like my nephew growing up in South Wales, he occasionally does some pretty American sounding, like he will add in rus and say card and things, which is definitely not a part of his accent, but it's an influence and something that he enjoys. So I feel like it's all a bit more kind of up for grabs nowadays. But back in the day, you could maybe listen to the radio, and probably at the time, people on the radio were using this kind of elite accent, and you might try and copy that, but you're probably not going to have had a huge amount of exposure to other things. So I think you're probably right. I think probably at that time, people probably were a little more kind of, their accents weren't sort of morphing into other things quite so much.
Yeah, I figured as much. How long were you on the show for, Masters?
It was over about 2 months, sort of jumping in and out. Yeah.
Very cool. And what was your, did you, we always ask this, don't we, Dougie, about doing a boot camp or what the sort of...
I didn't do a boot camp because I was kind of mostly behind a desk and sort of on the ground, really. There was talk at one point because they were going to be doing 10 episodes. And when I booked it, they said something about in the last 3. And then I was measured up for some sort of winter coats, and I know that Jeffrey was involved in the Russian shuttle mission, so I suspect at one point they were maybe going to be including some of that stuff in the show. But I think they took away the 9th episode and sort of made the 10th one longer, basically. So I was never in any of the planes or anything. So I just spoke to other actors about that and used my imagination. But I was really pleased to see that Jeffrey, we saw a bit more of his story in the documentary, and what he what he gave to the group when he joined. That was really nice to see that.
So Matt, what was his biggest contribution, do you think, to the group when he joined?
I think it was...
I mean, obviously, it sounds like he's had a great personality and he's very popular and respected. But what was his main sort of gift, if you like? What did he change? What did he bring to the group?
I think I'll have to paraphrase Rosie Rosenthal when he was talking about the fact that, before Jeffrey, they were a great group, but after Jeffrey, or because of Jeffrey, they became an outstanding group. And I think he just instilled that discipline and formation flying that made them an excellent outfit from a mission perspective, but also saved lives at the end of the day. I think that formation flying can't be discounted or overstated in terms of the importance and how it really protected the guys on mission. So I think, to me, that's probably one of his, part of his lasting legacy.
And is that something he developed himself, like over his experience? Because obviously he was with another group before it when he was up in the air. Or is that something that he'd taken from, had he seen like British bomber groups do this? Or was this something he recognized early on? Obviously, like you see, like obviously formation, getting in the formation, like you say, is key to safety. But was there any particular aspects of that he really pushed? Was it like flying closer together or flying specific formations.
I was going to add to that, Dougie, as well. Was it a case of tightening up what they already had, or was he instilling a regime of flying?
Yeah. I think it, to an extent, is tightening up what they already had. I don't think he necessarily invented anything new. This was what was being taught throughout the Army Air Forces at the time, but just it's like you have different teachers who teach you different things, and he just had a way about doing it. And he had he came in on day one and said, "This is important. Like we have to figure this out now in order to move forward." And I think you saw him where he said they were taking off flight status for 2 days just so they could practice. You can't say enough about practice when it comes to, formation flying.
Yeah.
And just visually speaking, like for us, thinking about it, you can see it in the episodes, like episode 5, that incredible episode 5, all the formation and then all the German fighters coming and everything. But how does it sort of manifest itself? And like, how incredible is it to us to think about? How close are they in formation?
They're extremely close. I mean, it's nerve-wracking to think about how close they were. Talk about wingtip to wingtip, but these guys are, yards apart at times or meters apart at times. But that's just what it took to fly a tight formation. So it's requires a very high level of discipline to be able to do that, especially when you're taking fire and planes are moving in and out of the formation.
What height were they flying at? Because certain heights there's some very bumpy kind of heights, isn't there? It must have been incredibly difficult to control because these very heavy aircraft, fully laden, it must have been a real challenge just to keep in formation as well.
Right. I mean, when you're flying at 20,000 feet, nothing is easy, especially lack of oxygen, thin air, and while you're taking a barrage of flak, it's really hard to maintain your focus. But that's a must to maintain your focus and stay in your spot in the formation.
Mm. And do you reckon like that was one of the things he instilled, like in taking the group to practice for like 2 days and kind of instilling that discipline? Is this one of the things that he was renowned for, effectively?
I think
I guess that's what saved lives, isn't it? Because that's what it does on the ground, doesn't it? If you instill discipline, and you end up coming back with more guys, right?
For sure. I think that's a big piece of it. And then also he was just there for a long time. They had some acting COs before that. They had a prior CO that was there and killed on his first mission. So I think we've all been in situations where we've had like bosses turning over and it hurts confidence. But Jeffrey was there for a long time and really instilled that confidence amongst the guys.
Yeah.
Christopher, are you starting to, because I know just from talking to some of the guys, Masters of the Air guys, who've all been wonderful guests and just very, very erudite young men, are you starting to get a feeling of the gravity of the role that you took on and the legacy that it now has?
Yeah.
I mean, just listening to Matt Mabe there, yeah.
What was that, sorry?
Just listening to Matt there, you're sort of seeing what this guy achieved. And
it's such a privilege to play somebody like that, and it feels like just massive shoes to fill. And I'm just so grateful, not just to have done it, but also that the show has been made, so it's shone a light on these people, because otherwise I wouldn't have known anything about them, and I'm so glad that I do.
Yeah, because we've been sort of doing Band of Brothers stuff for years and doing all the legacy there, and we've spoken about the Pacific guys, and the Air War stuff did sort of get kind of overlooked for the longest time, in my opinion, anyway.
Do you mean overlooked from a media perspective?
Yeah, I do, actually. And just from a general history perspective and the way things are taught, it's because I felt like that too. I mean, I'm like a history nerd and I read about stuff, but you just sort of think, oh, the bombers did that. And then on the ground, this happened. But you just sort of thought, oh, the bomb groups did that, and you didn't really delve deep enough into what was actually achieved by guys flying at night, or flying in daylight bombing formations and only coming back with one aircraft over Munster and all this kind of business. And I think just from what we do, particularly we did tours, we just did a Masters of the Air tour actually. Like the interest level is very high now, and I feel like this may have a snowball effect of people being interested in this particular period of history and these particular actions. And I'm just wondering how it's sort of affecting you guys. I know the guys we had on the tour were totally blown away by it. Well, they were seeing new things as well, and we were going to cemeteries and we were going to like control towers, and they got to go down the runway and all this business. But yeah, so you're sort of you're catching on to the gravitas with all.
Yeah, and I feel like it's just sort of the start when you start. Because I mean, we filmed it 3 years ago, but I've learned so much more since since we filmed it, because it's kind of opened up a big interest for me, and I'm sure that's the same for lots of other people as well. And I imagine as time goes on, you're sort of on the lookout for more information and to understand it more and more. Yeah.
How has it infected the 100th Bomb Group, Maddie? I mean, the more we go on month to month, I mean, we keep in contact and everything. How has it affected your work with the 100 Bomb Group? Are you getting more and more interest? Are you getting more and more sort of people reaching out to you?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's been the most positive aspect of this, both just people reaching out of general interest, and then some families that have reached out. I think my favorite story as of late, I think I might have told Matt, is in the series, there's a guy named William Quinn, the blonde-haired guy who evades capture. And Quinn's son, in real life, was in the military, and had not heard about the series, and was telling me that he was at a veterans group talking about his dad's service. And some guy said, "Wow, that sounds a lot like William Quinn from Masters of the Air." And the guy's like, "Wait, what the heck is Master? What are you talking about? What's Masters of the Air?" He goes to find out his dad's in this series. So I think there's a lot of those stories where people had like no clue about this and have really latched on. But I think like one thing Matt saw when he was with the guys a couple weeks ago is that the interesting thing about the air wars, there's a lot of places you can go. There's in the Marines, not everybody can go to Iwo Jima or whatnot. Whereas if you were stationed in England, there's so many of these museums that were the real place. So you can actually go visit and lay your hands on something that was real to that period. So I think that's one thing that's very special about this. And I hope more people will make that pilgrimage over there to go see it.
Yeah, I mean, and you just, and they are incredible places, actually. It's Bob Abbott's that we went to. I mean, that's a really good museum, and it's a really good place, and we did a screening there and everything. But and they have a ball turret, an actual ball turret for the gun, and you can go in it, but only if you're about the same size as my daughter. Like literally, it's the reverse of a roller coaster. There's a line, and so you can go in if you're under this line. Dude, I am not a tall man, but I towered over it by about 1.5 feet. Like literally, it was the one time I felt like sizes. It's incredible. You must have been tiny to be able to fit in there.
Terrified as well. The terrifying position that.
Yeah. And did like you personally, Christopher, I know your role and Thomas's role is more sort of ground based, but did you get, maybe from watching the screenings or just talk around the set, did you get any sort of concept of the fear that they must have gone through on those flights? The concentrated fear, going through flak fields, anti-aircraft, anti-bomber fighters and everything.
Did you ever manage to visit the actual set where they were shooting, like, while they're in aircraft?
No, I never went there.
That on a different, was it all shot in the same place? Was you in a...
No, it was
sound
mainly
studio,
two separate spaces. So there was the Thorpe Abbott stuff, which was amazing because they basically just built the whole thing, and it was incredible. The production design was insane in terms of, because you know how quite often on some projects behind you where the camera is facing, it looks amazing, and then in front of you it's sort of you're having to use your imagination a little bit. This felt like 360 degrees, just the actual place. And then Video Village was usually quite far away. And, so there'd be a camera and a couple of lights. But other than that, you just sort of felt like you were there. It felt very easy to immerse yourself in it, even down to the, smell of coffee and the you didn't really have to use your imagination a huge amount. So in terms of everybody in the studio, in the sort of the big volume that they were in, I can only imagine what that was like. But I imagine it must have been incredibly helpful as an actor to have all of that. But I don't know. I mean, I know the job of an actor is to imagine, but it does feel almost kind of unimaginable, really, what these men were going through and how they got into the planes and how they were able to get back into them, like we saw with that storyline with Rosie.
Yeah, remarkable. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a slightly facetious question now, but when you're working on a set like Masters of the Air, and there's a lot of British and Commonwealth actors on the set, and they're all doing specific accents, how difficult is it for you personally not to sidle up to someone and start giving them notes on their accents?
I think it's really important to know what you're being paid to do.
And who's going to hit you?
Yeah, exactly. But also, I mean, the people that they had coaching on that show are brilliant, and they're in very good hands. And if I've not done the work to look at some of those very specific regional accents that they're doing, period appropriate, maybe specific down to the individual, I really don't think it's my place to start sticking my oar in. It's interesting as a dialect coach, because I've done some dialect coach work on productions, and it's I've done work on productions and in drama schools and theatre productions, and it's so interesting how it's such a strange role, in that you're in some ways you're quite sort of high status, in that you're very close with the actors, you're maybe talking to the producers, the directors, so you seem quite sort of important, but also it depends very much on the project in terms of what specifically they want you to do. And quite often, especially with film and TV, there's quite a sort of strict line between accent and acting, and I think there's a fear about stepping on toes and giving a bit of an acting note. But it's tricky because the two things are often, there's a sort of grey area between them, especially when you think about prosody, the musicality and rhythm of an accent that's completely related to what the actor's intention is, what they're trying to do. So it's sometimes quite tricky to navigate that and to be careful not to be sort of planting any creative ideas in the actor's head. I find it's best to sort of give options and then make sure it's the actor that's the one that's deciding on specifically what they're doing. But it's also quite tricky because I've had experiences. I was working on a show called Wheel of Time, and there was a actor on that just asked me, how would you do this moment? What would be your sort of reading of that? And it's quite tricky when the actor's sort of wanting that sort of that way of working.
Kind of yeah. Interesting.
Yes, because I was going on to something here that I read earlier today, and I thought I'd bring it up on the podcast, because it's the acting that's important, not the accent. It can't be jarring, but you can't just be playing accent or just doing mimicry, because you can end up just being a vapid mimic.
Yes, I completely agree. And you see that with some biopics that are very sort of like technically accurate, but they haven't captured the spirit of the person. And usually that's because they're thinking about, you can sort of almost feel that the
Almost
actor is focusing on the technique. I remember talking to my wife worked with Michael Sheen once, and I was very fortunate to have a chat with him, and I think I bored him to tears because I was just asking about accents and stuff for about an hour. But he was talking about, because he's obviously played lots of real people, and he's excellent at it.
Rubbish lad.
Very good, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he was talking about how it's important to find particular details, but then you need to forget about it all and sort of almost imagine like hanging clothes on a clothesline. You have these kind of anchors, but then it needs to be you, because otherwise you get that exact problem you were talking about, where it's a sort of flat, soulless mimic. And I think capturing the spirit and the energy, especially when it's a real person, is so much more important than worrying loads about the accent. And as you say, it can get in the way if that's the focus. Sometimes it's better kind of not to bother so much with the accent, and if it's going to sacrifice people following this character's journey, I think.
But sometimes, like, I find that accents, you have to commit to it as well. So you prepare and sort of forget about it. But
yeah, that's exactly it. You've got to find it, make it part of your muscle memory, and not think about it because the camera is going to see exactly what you're thinking about. And if you're thinking, oh, I've got a diphthong coming up on this word, and if you're sort of thinking about that, you're not going to be in the scene, obviously.
You can really see it when people don't commit or when they're overthinking it.
It's a really tricky balancing act. Yeah.
Stifling.
So if you look at if you watch Doctor Strangelove and you watch Peter Sellers in Doctor Strangelove, and actually Peter Sellers in Lolita as well, his accent and his mimicry is absolutely spot on. But he's completely vacuous in his face. You can see him just recalling the words in exactly the right sort of diphthong, triphthong, and the rest of it. But there's nothing going on with him at all. In a couple of the characters in
I've never actually. That's on my watch list. Yeah,
definitely as well. I tell you why I bring this up as well, and we can all discuss it as well, because I think it's an interesting point. On my Instagram today, there was a trailer for the new Bob Dylan film. Have you seen this?
No.
And it's the kid from June, whatever his name is, Timothy Chalamet or whatever his name is. I don't know what his second name is. And I read some of the comments underneath about, he doesn't have his mannerisms or doesn't quite. It looks freaking brilliant, and the kid looks amazing, but he's not too worried about himself getting in the way. Do you know what I mean? There's a little bit of him in it, clearly, and I think he sings the songs and everything, but it looks amazing. And I think that's the kind of point we're trying to hit there. That it isn't just about, watch a documentary on Bob Dylan. I don't know. I think his interpretation of it and the way he's going about it is brilliant. And it's there's nothing wrong with having a bit of the actor in it as well. Do you know what I mean? I think it's quite an interest in his interpretation of Bob Dylan. It didn't need to be a soulless mimicry of him. But I think if I'd have put that in the comment section, it would have taken up this much time and no one would have read it. But I'm making my point now.
Good point, well made.
Yeah. And I think people miss the point of that sometimes, and it looks absolutely brilliant anyway. So if we carry on with what we're talking about here, do you get actors? Most actors have got an ear. Doug's got an ear. He can do voices. I can do voices pretty well. Do you get actors sometimes that just don't have it? Like, and what do you do with
them? Well, you can work from a pretty technical perspective. I mean. Any speech sound that you make is a physical action, isn't it? It's just the byproduct. Any speech sound is the byproduct of air coming out through your mouth and or through your nose, and in some way you're kind of shaping or obstructing that airflow with things like your tongue being a particular position, or you're doing a particular gesture or whatever. So if somebody's really not hearing something, maybe they're not hearing the difference between two vowels, and they're sort of getting magnetized towards doing the same thing. You could look at it from a physical perspective and help them find it physically. But every actor's different and likes to work in different ways. Some people love the symbols, the phonetics, which is a kind of written down version of what you're doing physically. Some people find that horrifically confusing and they hate that. Some people like you to rewrite words. So you kind of do phonetics, fake phonetics, where you kind of spell it out in a way that suggests that sound. Some people like to use sort of images, and you might say, for example, why don't you imagine that you've got a hard-boiled egg in the center of your mouth, and what that's probably going to do is it's going to kind of lower, from a technical perspective, it's going to lower the center of the body of your tongue. It's probably going to raise your soft palate, so you're going to start getting this sort of quality. And amazingly, that might start to change various kind of things that are happening with the vowels and the consonants without you even having to, think about those. That just happens as a byproduct, as the kind of shape changing. So that might be something that you do as well, just sort of changing essentially the posture, changing the kind of how your mouth feels. So there's lots of ways in, and I think it depends on the particular actor. But as you say, a lot of actors have a fairly good ear, at least for the accents that they've had exposure to. If it's something completely new to them, then it's about listening is the number one most important thing. If you can't sort of hear it in your head a little bit, you don't really know what you're aiming for.
Is there any accents or is there any, because I always think Londoners, we struggle to do accents because we've got lazy mouths. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of, is there any, what part of the country has advantage? Have you noticed that, it's easier for Yorkshire, if your own accent is a Yorkshire accent, to do an American, or is it easy? Do you see what I mean?
Well, that's a good example.
Anyone have an advantage or disadvantage here?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be, there's going to be all sorts of things where, if you think about Yorkshire, that was an interesting example, because Yorkshire accent, which actually is where I'm from originally, I'm from North Yorkshire, so my dad sounds a lot like this, and you've got these things called lexical sets. So you've got words like trap and words like bath, which in any Northern English accent is going to be pronounced with the same sound. So you'd say the cat sat on the mat and the giraffe had a laugh. And if you're coming from that as a kind of that's your rules, and you go over to most American accents, you're going to realize, the vowels changed, but actually that kind of rule about having a cat sitting on a mat and the giraffe having a laugh, there's the same sound, even though the specific vowel quality, the position of your tongue is a little different. That's going to really help you out. If you're coming from, so in my accent, stop me if I'm being boring, by the way, I can go off on one about this. But yeah, if you're, in my accent, I've got what's called a lot cloth merge. So I would say words like hot, lot, and shop, which are lot words with an O vowel, and then cloth words like cloth, dog, and sausage, I would say also with an O sound. So for me, that's just one big bucket of sounds. If I'm then looking at something like a New York accent, I need to find out what the differences are there. So in a New York accent, I've got hot, which is lot, and dog, which is cloth, and I'm actually going to hear two different sounds, hot dog, or something like that. And so for me, I need to kind of work out, okay, what are the words that go in this bucket? What are the words that go in this bucket? But if I'm coming from an accent like a very old-fashioned RP accent, where I say a lot of cloth, and I have that split, actually, maybe there aren't that many of those actors left that are in speech training. But if there were, they would find going to New York much easier because they've already got two buckets. So if you come from an accent where you've got lots of the lexical sets kind of separated rather than merged, that's a bit easier to do lots of accents, I think. That was a very rambly answer, sorry.
No, that was fantastic. What made you get into this? What did you start out as an actor first or a coach first?
I started out as an actor first. And And yeah, I was just always I've always enjoyed accents and sounds. I was a chorister growing up, so maybe that was part of it because we'd sing in different languages and things. And yeah, I've always just loved it. And then when I came out of drama school, I just always seemed to be auditioning for different accents. And then I guess casting directors must have thought, oh yeah, he's fairly good, so I'll get him to come in for this other accent. And I'd have to quickly learn that. So I sort of started down the rabbit hole out of kind of necessity.
Are you a self-taught accent coach, or did you train as an accent coach as well? Is there any specific?
Yeah, but so I trained with a place called Knight Thompson Speechworks. I'm a certified KTS teacher, and they're amazing. They're kind of like the accent coaches. Right. And it's incredibly thorough. So that's my main training through them, but lots of self-taught stuff as well. Yeah.
Autodidact, fantastic. I've got one for you that you can explain away. What is an aspirational accent? This is just total nerd. And I'll give you the example. I'll feed it to you. Is Nottingham.
So what was the question? What is an aspirational accent? And the answer is
aspirational changes in an accent. I'm not trying to catch you out here. You know, like the Nottingham accent. And I'm specifically talking about the O sound in the Nottingham accent.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, well, an aspirational thing is something that we kind of aspire towards, isn't it? And within speech, that's a very kind of problematic idea because we've got these standard accents. In England, we've got received pronunciation. Within the States, we've got a general American accent. These are both kind of aspirational accents that people kind of sometimes see as kind of high prestige ways of sounding, and our accent is part of our identity and how we come across. So some people feel like, oh, well, if I sound this way, I'll come across in a particular way, which is, fairly kind of problematic, but that's something that happens. So within the GOAT lexical set, so words like oh no, blow, show, etc., I think that's quite a that's one that people can quite often change to sound kind of posher, basically, within various accents. Because if I say, oh no, there's a goat, and I say, oh no, there's a goat, even though I've changed my tongue in the subtlest position to get oh rather than oh, so many people within the UK, I think, would hear that tiny difference and go, oh, that means they went to private school and whatever else they concocted. So I suspect, I don't know if this answers your question, but I suspect in Nottingham, a similar thing happens with GOAT, where people trying to sort of climb a social ladder might change the way that they do O sounds, maybe.
Well, yeah, because I was actually speaking to the dialect coach when they did the Russell Crowe film, Sheriff of Nottingham film.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Use that the Nottingham accent, because apparently the Nottingham accent, I mean, it's almost north. It's almost northern. It's got that sort of sound, but the O sound is like that. So don't go, Tony. But then it's back to northern again.
Interesting.
And they weren't going to use it because I don't think it came in until the 1960s, and it was an aspirational thing. And apparently, women didn't want to use like an O sound because it made them sound common. Do you know what I mean? Don't go. So they changed. Don't go. So it is the most jarring sound if you hear someone from Nottingham. Their O sound is suddenly weirdly super posh, and everything else sounds kind of north.
You hear a similar thing in some Liverpool accents, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing that happens with goats. I've heard some linguists talk about as a kind of like gendered split. So you'd get people like Stephen Graham would do an O sound. So we say, oh no, there's a goat, something like that. But female identifying speakers quite often, and this is, with accents, quite often there's, we're trying to find rules. These aren't necessarily going to be entirely accurate for everybody, but we're doing our best to find patterns. But female identifying speakers can quite often do an O sound. So, oh no, there's a goat, rather than oh no, there's a goat. which feel quite different. And it might be that they're from the same place, but they're changing that sound. So I wonder if there's a similar thing that's happened around there.
Yeah, I think it is, and it's exactly that. Yeah. I'm just going to go on for ages. This is for totally my nerdy hobby, but I go on for ages. But listen, Christopher.
Well, I hope your listeners find
Matt,
that.
Me and you should leave, Matt, because these two
I
are.
would leave. There's going to be another hour of me just waffling.
They're falling in love, Matt.
Yeah. Well, we could do the Northern Irish accent. That I go. That took me ages to learn. That's a beautiful one to learn. All the musicality of it, but we won't because we're going to bore people to tears and we'll lose Patreon subscribers. But listen, Christopher, we've had you for about an hour. We're going to round up now, and I always ask my prey the same question. We subhead the podcast, the Nearly Men, and is there something you could nearly have been? I know you said you were a chorister. Could you have nearly been an opera singer? Could you nearly have been a physics teacher? Could you nearly have been Spider-Man? Could you nearly have been the man that cleans the drains? I don't know. Was there some odd career path you nearly could have been, or was it just acting and falling in love with the nerdy phonetics behind beat pattern?
Well, from an acting perspective, probably the one that feels like it would have been probably the two that feel like they would have been the biggest sort of game changers were I got down to the last few for if you've seen Derry Girls, for the wee English fella in that.
Oh man, you'd have rocked at that. You'd have been brilliant at that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. The script was so good.
Yeah. You must be very close. Yeah, you got a real similar quality to that dude. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other one, which was I don't think I was far down the line at all, but I just mentioned because that was another Spielberg thing, and that was the lead in what was it he did? The sort of video game thing. Ready Player One. Yeah.
Ready Player One, yeah.
So those are my two acting ones that could have changed direction. And then the other thing that I thought of is my mum and dad. They've just retired, but they had a carpet business, and they used to ask me quite a lot, would I like to join and sort of sell and fix carpets and curtains. So maybe that could have been another
I feel like if you'd have done that, there would have been a lot of 1970s style double entendres you could have used on women. But I don't want to be arrested, so don't do that.
Well, one thing, just quickly talking about accents and carpets briefly, is that my dad would say something that in his accent feels, I think, fine, but in my sort of slightly more modern RP type accent does not sound fine. So he would say, right, I've had a really hard day, I've been humping carpets all day long. And I was helping my dad once, and my mum asked me how it had gone. I said, "Yeah, no, it's fine. Me and Dad were humping carpets, but it was fine." And it just read very, very differently.
It did. Before I let you go, what part of North Yorkshire are you from?
I'm from York.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I went to school right by Selby, Draxware, actually.
Ah, Selby. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm actually up in Richmond, North Yorkshire, right now.
Ah, cool.
Yes, God's country lad.
Aye.
Well, Christopher, thank you so much for coming on.
It's been lovely. Thank you.
Lovely to meet you, Christopher. Good to see you again, Matt.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Good to see you again, Matt. Thanks for coming on and adding your stardust as usual. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, mate.
Yep.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers, boy. Thanks very much. Ooh, got through that without the food coma killing me.
Yeah, I think you did really well considering you're totally off your peanut and
off my peanut.
Done very well.
Thanks very much. On garlic potatoes and all sorts of vegan delight.
Oh. Sounds like you need to lie down.
I definitely do need to lie down. You know what? I literally, at one point, because I'd starved myself at this meal, at one point people were saying, "You do realise you're sweating?" And I was like, I know. I'm sweating, but I'm not giving in. I'm literally.
Was it meat sweats? Did you get
No, she's a vegan, but like everything she cooks, vegan. It's all vegan food, but like still so rich. And lots of cooked garlic that pops and just fantastic.
Wow. Sounds awesome.
Yeah, my wife came to dinner there as well a week or two ago, and she was just looking at me like, "This is how you want me to be, isn't it?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, you'd be really fat if I could cook." I was like, "Give me the chance to prove you wrong." I would, though. I'd be really fat. All right, Dougie, it's been great. I'll catch you again next week. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to our Patreons. Thanks to everyone who supports the channel. The page comes on the tours and everything. We love you, and we'll see you next week.
See you later. Take it easy.